In this series, we are interpreting a book published on November 7, 2023, titled, Same as Ever, A Guide to What Never Changes. The author of this book is Morgan Housel, whom we've encountered before in his book, The Psychology of Money. That book was excellent and a massive bestseller, translated into 53 languages, selling over 3 million copies worldwide, making it the best-selling investment and finance book in the past 5 years. Housel, a former financial columnist for the Wall Street Journal, is now a partner at the Collaborative Fund. He is a profound thinker, capable of handling various ideas, often providing insightful perspectives. Additionally, he is well-read, making his articles rich with references and engaging. Unlike his previous work on investment and finance, this new book delves into more general principles. People in finance are often concerned about global situations, national destinies, and discussions about major trends. While Housel begins with this perspective, the book doesn't delve into analyzing current major trends. Instead, he takes a step back and encourages readers to contemplate a few philosophical questions. Is there really a trend in the ever-changing world? Can you grasp a trend? What can we truly learn from history? What is accidental, and what is inevitable? The answers are far from obvious. Housel is about to present ideas that may contradict the education you received in your early years. If you haven't encountered such reflections frequently, your perceptions may need a reconstruction. You may not necessarily achieve enlightenment immediately, but this book might help you approach situations with a slightly more open mind. Amidst constant upheavals, it's inevitable to feel lost. The theme of this book is what remains unchanged amid these transformations, something we can hold on to. Let's start with what you cannot grasp. You cannot grasp the grand trends of history. Many believe that history evolves strictly according to certain inevitable laws. They argue that significant events like the Great Depression, World War II, the rise and fall of the Soviet Union were bound to happen. That's not the case. What you perceive as inevitable is akin to the World Cup law some fans used to believe, such as, a World Cup held in Europe must be won by a European team, and a World Cup held in the Americas must be won by an American team, pure superstition. Housel cites 3 instances to illustrate the contingency of history. In August 1776, General Washington led the Continental Army against the British in the Battle of Long Island. Washington had 10,000 soldiers, while the British had 400 warships. Washington was defeated. On the night of August 28, the British planned to sail up the East River, attacking the Continental Army. If this strategy succeeded, Washington's forces would have been annihilated. However, luckily, the wind did not favor the British that night. Washington was saved. Historian David McCullough commented that if the wind had changed that day, there might not have been the United States. Fate depends on the wind. In 1915, the giant steamship Lusitania was traveling from New York to Liverpool, England. In an attempt to save money, the captain ordered the shutdown of the ship's 4th boiler. This would delay the ship by a day, but it seemed inconsequential. However, this slight delay brought the Lusitania directly into the path of the German U-20 submarine. The Germans, mistaking it for a British ship, torpedoed and sank the Lusitania. The American public was furious, and without this event, the United States might not have entered World War I. In 1933, newly elected U.S. President Franklin D. Roosevelt was attending a gathering in Miami. Security measures were not as strict back then, and Americans could freely carry firearms. Just before a speech, as Roosevelt was shaking hands with the mayor of Chicago, an assassin fired 5 shots. None hit Roosevelt. 1 bullet struck and killed the mayor. Otherwise, there would be no Roosevelt New Deal that continues to have an impact on the U.S. economy to this day. A friend of mine enjoys fortune-telling. I asked him to predict significant global events, but he said it's impossible. He can only predict minor events. This may sound counterintuitive. Aren't larger events more observable? Housel might agree with my friend's approach. The key is that major events often result from the convergence of various factors, making their mechanisms too complex, and therefore, their outcomes highly unpredictable. Housel suggests that a crucial lesson from history is that some of the most significant, impactful changes arise from random, unforeseen, and inadvertent encounters and decisions. In an alternate universe with slight parameter adjustments, outcomes could be drastically different. Major events follow the butterfly effect. You might argue that the examples mentioned earlier don't prove the point. Historical trends are determined by broad socio-economic conditions, and the examples are just minor details. You might say that regardless of population or economic factors, North American colonies were destined to surpass Britain. Independence was an inevitable trend, the strong trade and political ties between the U.S. and the Allied powers before World War I made the U.S. involvement inevitable. The Great Depression profoundly changed the U.S. economy with Keynesian principles supporting it, and any president would have adopted those measures. Housel would argue that your thinking is influenced by knowing the outcomes. At the time, there might have been equally strong factors pushing things in a different direction. You see the result, but you may not know or have forgotten the factors pushing in the opposite direction initially, leading to a strong belief that events should have unfolded the way they did. An after-the-fact armchair general. A good way to assess this is to see how people on the scene thought at the time. For example, during the 1930s Great Depression, which led to World War II and is considered one of the most significant events of the 20th century. Looking back, we might assume it was inevitable due to inherent contradictions in capitalism or the emergence of new technologies after the rapid growth of the 1920s. Housel consulted economic historians and asked if any scholars predicted the Great Depression before it happened. The answer was none. What seemed inevitable in hindsight was thought of as unlikely at the time. Moreover, even after the Great Depression began in 1929, people on the ground did not prioritize the issue that would later define that era, unemployment. Housel found a survey report from 1930 asking people what they believed the most significant issue in the U.S. was at that time. The answers, ranked by intensity, were 1. Judicial fairness. 2. Prohibition. 3. Lack of respect for the law. 4. Crime. 5. Law enforcement. 6. World peace. The topic of unemployment, which historians now consider the most memorable from that period, was ranked 18th in the list. By 1931, 2 years into the Great Depression, unemployment had only risen to the 4th position on the list. Comparing this with the harsh realities of unemployment during that time, it's evident that people did not adequately address the economic and psychological challenges posed by the Great Depression. You might argue that scholars of the past were not highly competent, but there's another way to assess this. See what today's people predict about historical trends. The Economist magazine publishes predictions for each year in its January issues. What did it predict? Looking back, the two most significant events since 2020 were the COVID-19 pandemic that erupted in December 2019 and the Russia-Ukraine war that erupted in February 2022. However, the January 2020 issue of The Economist made no mention of COVID-19, and the January 2022 issue completely overlooked the Russia-Ukraine war. The biggest events are the ones you can't predict. Perhaps precisely because they are hard to predict, their impact is so significant. If you believe that history follows a certain pattern, you can ask historians how major events in the world today will unfold. Take the Russia-Ukraine war as an example. Many believe that Russia is destined to fail, including myself, as I believe Russia is on the wrong side of history. However, this might be wishful thinking. If you look at global think tank reports, you'll find that many scholars still believe Russia has the upper hand. If we were to write 2 articles, one arguing why Russia lost and the other arguing why Russia ultimately won, it's challenging to say which one history will remember. Similarly, our familiar figure, legendary investor Ray Dalio of Bridgewater Associates, published a book in 2021 called Principles for Dealing with the Changing World Order, vigorously arguing that the dollar is about to decline, the renminbi will take over as the dominant currency, and Dalio heavily invested in the Chinese stock market. However, after more than 2 years, the Chinese stock market has not only failed to rise but has slightly declined, and there seem to be many issues with the Chinese economy. Is Dalio's broad view correct? We'll only know in a few more years. Regardless of the outcome, you can be sure that by then, people will say they knew it all along. Regardless, now you might admit that major trends are at least challenging to grasp. So, what's the point of reading books? What can you grasp? You can grasp a lot. For example, human nature. A fascinating point in American history is the 1950s. Regardless of which generation you ask, everyone will say the 1950s were the golden age of the U.S. economy, and people always reminisce about it. However, if you examine the historical context closely, you'll find that in terms of absolute income, home ownership rates, living standards, or working conditions, Americans in the 1950s were not as well off as in later decades. So, what made the 1950s so great? The answer is equality. In the post-World War II era, the U.S. economy still retained some of the inertia of wartime systems. The characteristic of wartime systems is that all wages are determined by the National War Labor Board, somewhat like a planned economy. This system of nationally set wages had the characteristic of minimal income inequality. What people truly yearn for is the sense of equality prevalent at that time. This holds true in the past, the present, and will likely continue into the future. People love equality. Equality contradicts efficiency, but people genuinely love equality. Deeper than equality is human expectation. Your happiness is not determined by your absolute living standards but by the gap between your living standards and your expectations. If you earn $5,000 a month but everyone around you earns $3,000 or $4,000, you feel happy. If you earn $100,000 a year, but everyone around you earns $200,000 a year, you'll expect to earn $250,000, so you feel unhappy. This is why equality is good. No one needs to envy anyone, and equality lowers expectations. Housel says, everyone, everywhere, doing almost anything, is just chasing that little bit of space between expectation and reality. So, for personal happiness, you need to manage your expectations, and for societal stability, the government needs to manage the expectations of its citizens. This is the timeless truth of same as ever. Because major events result from the combined effects of various factors, predicting major events is difficult. Because different, often opposing trends are always present on the stage, capturing historical trends is also challenging. But human nature doesn't change. Housel says that no matter how the world changes, people will always 1.be driven by greed and fear. 2.be persuaded by risk, envy, and tribal belonging. 3. Exhibit excessive confidence and short-sightedness. 4. Consider certainty a form of happiness. Understanding these will be beneficial to you. Jeff Bezos of Amazon once said that people often ask him what will change in the next 10 years, but few ask what won't change. Knowing what won't change is more important. No matter how things change in the future, Amazon's customers will still want fast delivery, so you can always invest heavily in those aspects. While it's unpredictable which trend will prevail, human nature won't change, so many means won't change. What you need to do is not seek predictions but understand human nature and contemplate means. This is concentration.
If you feel there is value in this, please like, subscribe to this channel, and leave your thoughts or suggestions in the comments section. Let's grow together and read more good books.